Monica's not ready for leadership exposure. Daniel Mercer didn't even glance at me when he said it. The VP nodded slowly, making a note on his tablet. The presentation on the screen, my presentation, had Daniel's name at the bottom right corner where mine should have been. Not mine. I had built the entire cloud architecture from scratch. I had written the detailed rollout plan, section by section. I had stayed until midnight for 3 consecutive nights, testing the failover sequence until it was perfect. And he'd erased me in 1 sentence. The room moved on to discussing implementation timelines and budget allocations. I didn't move. I sat perfectly still in my chair at the far end of the conference table, my face neutral, my hands folded in my lap. Because in that moment, I understood something terrifying. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't him forgetting to give me credit. This was deliberate strategy. I looked down at my notebook where I'd been taking meeting notes. My handwriting was steady, professional. No one could see the rage building inside me. I drew a small star next to the date, a marker. Because this wasn't the first time he'd done it, and I was going to make sure it would be the last. My name is Monica Anderson. I'm 35 years old. White, American. Born and raised in Ohio. I have 2 degrees, Information Systems from Michigan State and Business Strategy from Northwestern. 6 professional certifications in cloud architecture, cybersecurity, and systems integration. I graduated with honors from both programs. But I didn't have industry years. I'd spent my 20s working in academia, teaching, and researching. When I decided to transition to corporate tech, I was starting from scratch in terms of practical experience. So I took an entry-level IT role at Stratford Systems, one of the most respected technology firms in the country. Fortune 500. Cutting-edge projects. The kind of place that looked impressive on a resume. I thought humility would buy me opportunity. I thought proving myself through hard work and exceptional results would be enough. I didn't realize my competence would trigger someone's insecurity. Especially Daniel Mercer's. Daniel was my direct manager, 42 years old, 20 years at Stratford. Comfortable in his position as IT operations manager. He smiled when we first met, shook my hand warmly, told me he was excited to mentor someone with my academic background. I believed him. The sabotage started during my first week. But I didn't recognize it as sabotage then. I thought it was just corporate bureaucracy, the normal friction of getting started at a new company. I was wrong. My system access sat pending approval for 21 days. 21 days. Without proper credentials, I couldn't deploy code, couldn't test applications, couldn't log into production tools, couldn't access half the systems I needed to do my actual job. Every time I asked Daniel about it, he smiled that same warm smile. Shadow the team longer, he'd say. Learn our rhythm. No rush. We want you to understand our culture before diving into technical work. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like good management. But then I noticed something. The 24-year-old male hire who started 2 weeks after me, fresh out of college, no advanced degrees, no certifications, had full system permissions within 48 hours. I watched him deploy code on his 3rd day. That's when I realized Daniel wasn't delaying my access because of onboarding best practices. He was positioning me, setting me up as the perpetual trainee, the person who needed extra hand-holding, the one who wasn't quite ready for real responsibility. And positioning, I learned quickly, can destroy careers quietly. It happens in small moments, repeated delays that seem individually reasonable but collectively create a narrative. She's slower, she needs more support, she's not quite getting it. I started documenting everything, every access request, every delay, every excuse. Not because I knew what I'd do with the documentation, but because something told me I'd need it. In team meetings, Daniel corrected me constantly, always for minor things, phrasing choices, terminology preferences, presentation style. Not quite, Monica, he'd say, his voice light and friendly. Still learning our language here, he'd add with a chuckle. Let me clarify what Monica meant, he'd interrupt, then restate my exact point using slightly different words. He said it all so pleasantly, but repetition creates reputation. After 2 months of this, I noticed something shift. People stopped asking me direct questions in meetings. They'd ask Daniel about my work instead, even when I was sitting right there. Daniel, what's the status on Monica's integration project? Daniel, can you explain Monica's approach to the database optimization? Daniel, do you think Monica's timeline is realistic? I'd become a subject, not a participant. And Daniel would answer on my behalf, smiling, helpful, subtly adjusting my words to sound less certain, less authoritative. Monica's exploring some interesting approaches, he'd say. We're keeping an eye on her progress. Exploring. Keeping an eye on. Language that positioned me as an experiment, not an expert. I stopped trying to correct the record in meetings. It only made me look defensive. Instead, I started building relationships outside of Daniel's sphere, having coffee with people from other departments, offering to help with cross-functional projects during my lunch breaks, until one project changed everything. I designed a cloud optimization model that would reduce the company's projected infrastructure costs by 18%. 18% of a multi-million-dollar budget. I spent 3 weeks building it. Mathematical modeling, cost-benefit analysis, risk assessment, implementation roadmap. When I presented it to Daniel privately, he frowned. This feels too academic, he said. Too theoretical. Our systems are more complex than what you'd see in a university research setting. I designed it specifically for our architecture, I replied, showing him the technical specifications. He waved it away. Let me think about whether this is worth pursuing. Don't mention it to anyone else yet. I don't want to create false expectations. I nodded and left his office. 3 weeks later, Daniel presented my exact model to senior leadership, word for word, slide for slide, even the specific examples I'd used, with his name attached as the primary architect. I sat in that meeting, watching him take credit for my work, and waited for him to acknowledge me. He didn't, not once. After the meeting, I approached him in the hallway. That was my optimization model, I said quietly. He looked at me with what seemed like genuine confusion. I built on your initial concept, yes. Refined it for executive presentation. That's what management does. Takes raw ideas and makes them strategic. He didn't deny stealing it. He reframed theft as mentorship. That night, I stopped trying to impress Daniel Mercer, and I started preparing for something else entirely. I created a private folder on my personal cloud drive. Not on company systems, nothing they could access or delete. Inside, I began collecting evidence, time-stamped emails showing when I'd sent Daniel my work, screenshots of version histories showing my authorship on documents that later appeared with his name, records of every access delay, every meeting where he'd corrected me, every instance of credit theft. No emotion, no angry commentary, no dramatic language, just facts. Dates, documents, witnesses. Because facts don't argue, they accumulate. I learned that in academia, how to build an airtight case through documentation, how to let evidence speak for itself. Every week, I added something new to the folder. A pattern was emerging. Clear. Undeniable. Daniel was systematically blocking my visibility while taking credit for my output. He was good at it. Subtle, always with plausible deniability. But he'd made one critical mistake. He assumed I wouldn't document it. He assumed I'd accept his version of reality. He assumed wrong. The accumulation had only begun, and I was patient. The operations department reached out to me directly one Tuesday afternoon. They needed help with a complex system integration, something that crossed multiple platforms and required both technical skill and strategic thinking. I mentioned it to Daniel in our weekly one-on-one. I'd like to help operations with their integration issue, I said. Daniel's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. That's outside your scope. Stay focused on your assigned projects. We can't have you getting pulled in multiple directions. It would only take a few hours. Monica, I need you to trust my judgment on workload management. So officially, I stayed focused. Unofficially, I helped operations after hours. Late evenings, early mornings, weekend hours when Daniel wasn't around to monitor me. 3 days later, the operations director sent an email, not to Daniel, but to the VP of Technology. Monica Anderson's integration solution prevented a critical bottleneck that would have delayed our Q3 rollout. Her approach was innovative and executed flawlessly. The email was forwarded to Daniel. He didn't respond to it. But the next morning, he closed my office door with unusual firmness. His tone had changed completely. "You're creating problematic optics," Daniel said, sitting across from me with his arms folded. "Optics?" I asked calmly. "Freelancing on other departments' projects, going around established channels, it can be misinterpreted. Misinterpreted as what? As political ambition, as not being a team player. I met his eyes. The operations director seemed pleased with the results. That's not the point. The point is perception. When you operate outside your assigned scope, it raises questions about whether you're trying to make me look bad. There it was. The real concern. Not that I was overstepping, that I was becoming visible without his permission. I was helping a colleague solve a problem, I said. I need you to understand something, Daniel continued. Success here requires navigating relationships carefully. Ambition without political awareness can damage careers. He meant, stay in your lane, stay under my control. I nodded slowly. I understand. And I did understand. I understood that isolation was his primary weapon, that visibility would be mine. So I kept expanding my network, carefully, strategically, always delivering excellent work, always being helpful without seeking credit, building a reputation that existed independently of Daniel's narrative, until his own system failed spectacularly. The company planned a major cloud infrastructure deployment. High stakes, multiple departments involved, executive visibility. Daniel led the project. 2 weeks before the scheduled rollout, I reviewed the architecture plans and spotted a structural vulnerability in the database migration sequence. A technical flaw that would cause system failures under high load. I documented the issue carefully and brought it to Daniel. This migration approach will create race conditions, I explained, showing him the technical specifications. Under peak load, we'll see cascading failures. Daniel barely looked at my analysis. The architecture's been reviewed by 3 senior engineers. Your concern is noted, but we're proceeding as planned. I really think, Monica, I appreciate your diligence, but you don't have the deployment experience to evaluate enterprise-scale risk. Trust the team's judgment. I saved my analysis in my personal folder and said nothing more. The deployment went live on schedule. 36 hours later, production crashed, exactly as I'd predicted. Customer-facing systems went down. Transactions failed. Executives demanded immediate answers. Daniel called an emergency meeting. We experienced execution inconsistencies during the deployment phase, he explained to the VP. Some communication gaps in the handoff process. He didn't say my name, he didn't mention my warning, but the VP's expression had shifted. She looked at Daniel differently now. I'll need a full post-mortem report, she said. Root cause analysis, and I want input from the entire technical team. Of course, Daniel agreed. That's when the company initiated something much bigger than Daniel realized. 2 weeks after the deployment failure, an email went out to all department heads. Stratford Systems is conducting an operational efficiency review across all departments to identify process improvements and optimize team performance. Daniel laughed when he read it during our team meeting. Routine corporate audit, he said dismissively. They do these every few years. Just answer any questions honestly and we'll be fine. But I understood what audits actually measured. Throughput, delivery times, approval bottlenecks, project completion rates, and Daniel controlled all the approvals in our department. Every code deployment needed his sign-off. Every architecture decision needed his review. Every project had to pass through his evaluation before moving forward. Gatekeepers create bottlenecks, and bottlenecks show up clearly in efficiency metrics. I'd learned in business school that what gets measured gets managed. Daniel had been managing visibility and credit. Now the company was measuring throughput and delivery. The audit team spent 3 weeks collecting data. Daniel remained confident throughout. He had 20 years of tenure. He had strong relationships with senior leadership. He'd successfully positioned himself as the department's trusted expert. What he didn't realize was that metrics don't care about narrative. They just reveal patterns. And the patterns were about to become very visible to people who made decisions about organizational structure. During the 3rd week of the audit, I was called to meet with someone from HR. Not my direct HR representative. Someone from the organizational effectiveness team I'd never met before. She asked me careful questions about team dynamics, project workflows, and approval processes. Do you feel supported in your role? She asked. I thought about how to answer honestly without sounding bitter or vindictive. I've built alternative pathways for getting work done, I replied. She paused, pen hovering over her notepad. Alternative pathways? Can you elaborate? When standard approval processes create delays, I've developed relationships across other departments that allow me to contribute effectively. She wrote something down. And do these alternative pathways exist because standard processes are insufficient? I'd say they exist because I'm focused on outcomes over process politics. She asked a few more questions, then thanked me for my time. Daniel had no idea that conversation had happened. The audit team interviewed everyone in the department individually, confidentially, and leadership was quietly listening to a very different story than the one Daniel had been telling. A week later, something unprecedented happened. A senior director from the infrastructure planning team, someone 2 levels above Daniel in the organization, emailed me directly. "Monica, I've heard excellent things about your integration work from operations. Can you walk me through your cross-platform integration framework? I'd like to understand your approach for a project we're scoping." Not Daniel, me. I sent her everything. My documentation, my architecture diagrams, my implementation methodology. She responded within hours. "This is exactly what we need. Can we schedule time to discuss implementation?" Daniel found out about the email through the company's project tracking system. Suddenly, my regular one-on-one meetings with him, which had been canceled frequently over the past months, were back on his calendar. And his tone had changed again. But this time, he was being nice, suspiciously nice. Praising my work, asking for my input, suggesting I take on more visible projects. Kindness under scrutiny is rarely genuine. It's usually damage control. In our next team meeting, Daniel did something he'd never done before. He praised me publicly. "I want to acknowledge Monica's technical growth over the past year," he announced to the team. "She's improving quickly and starting to contribute at a higher level." Improving quickly. Starting to contribute. The language was careful. It acknowledged progress while still positioning me as developing, not developed. I smiled and thanked him. I didn't react to the subtle dismissiveness in his phrasing because the internal performance dashboards that measured actual output hadn't been released yet, and those would tell a very different story than the one Daniel was trying to establish. The audit was entering its final phase. Data was being compiled, patterns were being analyzed, reports were being written. Daniel kept up his newly supportive management style. I kept documenting everything. And waited. The dashboards were about to go live. When the internal performance dashboards finally launched, they were visible to all managers and directors across the company. Metrics on project completion rates, cross-team collaboration scores, technical output quality, efficiency ratings. My metrics told a clear story. Cross-team collaboration efficiency, significantly above department average. Project delivery quality, rated excellent by 3 separate departments. Innovation contributions, 4 implemented solutions with measurable business impact. Meanwhile, Daniel's department showed concerning patterns. Approval processing times, consistently slower than comparable departments. Project bottlenecks, concentrated at the management approval stage. Team output, strong individual contributions, slow departmental delivery. The data was impersonal, objective, undeniable. Senior executives began scheduling review meetings. Daniel stopped smiling. His confidence, that easy assurance that had defined all our interactions, started cracking. He began staying late at the office, having closed-door phone conversations, sending carefully worded emails justifying his approval processes. During one team meeting, he looked directly at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. Because he was finally realizing that the narrative he'd carefully constructed about my limitations wasn't matching the objective data about my performance. And objective data was what executives trusted when making organizational decisions. That's when he tried something desperate. "I've been thinking about your career development," Daniel said during what he'd labeled an important one-on-one meeting. "Okay," I replied cautiously. "There's an opportunity in the technical documentation team. Better alignment with your academic background. More writing, less hands-on system management. Could be a great growth path for you. A transfer. Away from strategic projects, away from visibility. Into a role that would essentially be a career dead end. I'm happy in my current role," I said. "I think you'd really thrive in an environment that values your particular strengths," he pressed. "Which strengths specifically?" He stumbled slightly. Your analytical approach, your attention to detail. Code words for, you're better suited for background work. I told him I'd think about it. Then I checked with my HR contact, the one from Organizational Effectiveness. Has Daniel Mercer submitted a transfer request for you? I asked carefully. He started one, she said. We haven't approved it. Why not? There was a pause. Because your performance trajectory suggests leadership potential. Moving you to technical documentation would be counterproductive to organizational goals. Daniel didn't know that note existed in my HR file. I did. Because I'd been building relationships with people who actually reviewed performance data rather than just controlling narrative. His attempt to relocate me had failed before I even knew about it officially, and his control over my career was slipping away. The following week, Daniel called me into his office and closed the door. His expression was different, harder, more direct. Are you escalating concerns about me to leadership? He asked. I met his eyes calmly. I answered direct questions when asked. I provide accurate information about my work and processes. That's not what I asked. Then clarify your question. He stared at me, and I saw the moment he realized something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't defensive. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't trying to placate him. I was simply prepared. Preparation changes power dynamics. I need to be able to trust my team, he said finally. Trust works both ways, I replied. The meeting ended shortly after. No resolution, no understanding. Just two people acknowledging that the old dynamic no longer existed. Later that day, the VP of Technology assigned me to a high-visibility project, a critical system migration with an aggressive timeline. Daniel hadn't recommended me for it. Leadership had selected me directly, and they'd given me something Daniel never had: authority to build my own team. The project Daniel assigned me next was clearly designed to make me fail. A massive database migration. Impossible timeline. Minimal support resources. Conflicting requirements from stakeholders. If I failed, Daniel could reset the narrative. She's not ready for complex projects. She needs more oversight. If I complained about the impossible requirements, I'd look incapable or inflexible. So I accepted the project with a simple "I'll get it done." Then I worked harder than I'd ever worked. 16-hour days, weekend planning sessions, ruthless prioritization. I brought in people from my cross-department network. I leveraged relationships I'd built when Daniel had been blocking me. The operations team helped with technical resources. The planning team provided strategic guidance. The infrastructure team offered architectural support. I delivered the migration 3 days ahead of schedule, with 0 critical errors, with formal thank you emails from 4 different departments, with measurable performance improvements that exceeded the original project goals. Daniel said nothing when I reported the completion, but leadership now had comparison data. Impossible project assigned to Monica, delivered early, exceeded expectations. Standard projects under Daniel's management, consistently delayed, meeting minimum requirements. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. 2 weeks after my project's success, Daniel was called to the executive floor. I watched him take the elevator up at 2:15 p.m. The meeting lasted 58 minutes. When he returned, he looked pale. His usual confident posture was gone. He walked with his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes focused on the floor. He canceled all his afternoon meetings, avoided eye contact with everyone, left the office an hour early without explanation, but no announcement came. No email, no team meeting, no change in organizational structure. Whatever had been discussed remained private. I continued my work, continued building relationships, continued delivering exceptional results, waiting. 3 days later, a draft document appeared briefly on the shared leadership drive before being moved to a restricted folder. I only saw it because I'd been given temporary access to leadership documents for my current project. The document was titled Operational Efficiency Audit, Preliminary Findings. One section caught my attention. IT Operations Department, centralized approval structure creating systemic delays. Recommendation: decentralize authority and establish direct reporting relationships for senior technical contributors. Daniel was the centralized approval structure. The recommendation was essentially to remove his gatekeeping power. But it wasn't final yet. The document was labeled draft for executive review only. Decisions hadn't been made. but the direction was clear. I saved nothing, downloaded nothing, left no trace that I'd seen it, but I understood where things were heading. And Daniel apparently didn't, because he made one final fatal mistake. A director from another department, someone I'd helped months ago, called me with a warning. "I thought you should know," she said carefully. "Daniel Mercer contacted me about you." "What did he say?" "He suggested you were politically ambitious and that I should be cautious about your motivations for helping my team." Political lie ambitious. The ultimate corporate smear suggesting someone's competence is actually manipulation. "How did you respond?" I asked. I told him that ambition, paired with consistent delivery, isn't political. It's just good performance, and that my team's results speak for themselves. Then she added, "I also forwarded our conversation summary to HR. People need to know when someone's trying to damage another person's reputation." Daniel didn't know that email existed. He didn't know he'd picked the wrong person to complain to. Someone who valued results over politics. He didn't know his attempt to undermine me had created one more piece of evidence. The audit had been escalated to a formal review, and the review now included Daniel's leadership style, not just departmental efficiency. Over the next 3 weeks, I noticed a change. Daniel stopped correcting me in meetings, stopped offering unsolicited feedback, stopped trying to involve himself in my projects. He wasn't ignoring me out of strategy. He was losing leverage. I could see it in small ways, how others in the department began asking me questions directly instead of deferring to Daniel. How my project approvals went through without delays. How I was included in strategic planning meetings that Daniel used to attend alone. The organizational structure was shifting around us, quietly, without formal announcement, and Daniel was being gradually moved to the periphery. Executive calendars were filling up with meetings labeled Organizational Structure Review and Department Optimization Planning. Something was coming, something significant. The week was internally labeled Structural Optimization Week. 2 mid-level management roles were under formal review across the company. Daniel's was one of them. He believed his 20 years of tenure would protect him, that history and relationships would outweigh recent performance data. 20 years does build authority, but it also builds long audit trails. And those trails were showing patterns of promising technical talent that left the department, of projects that consistently ran late, of bottlenecks that always centered on one person's approval. The final review meetings were scheduled. Daniel and I were called to separate meetings. Different conference rooms, different floors, different executives present. My meeting lasted 15 minutes. "We're restructuring the IT department to better leverage emerging technical leadership," the VP told me. "We'll have details for you next week." Daniel's meeting lasted over an hour. When he emerged, he walked past me in the hallway without making eye contact. His badge clearance had been changed, I noticed, because he had to wait for someone to badge him through a door he used to have access to. But the company hadn't announced anything publicly yet. The official memo was still being drafted, and I knew, because of my network, because of the relationships I'd built, that when it came, everything would change. The announcement came via email on a Wednesday morning. Organizational updates, IT Operations Department. I opened it along with everyone else, reading carefully. Effective immediately, the following structural changes have been implemented. Monica Anderson has been appointed Cross-Functional Integration Lead, reporting directly to the VP of Technology. Monica will oversee strategic technical initiatives across multiple departments and will have direct project authority. Daniel Mercer has been reassigned to technical advisory role, providing consultative support on legacy system maintenance. Technical advisory. No team reporting to him, no approval authority. No project management responsibilities. Essentially, a senior individual contributor role with a nice title that meant he'd been removed from management. The role change wasn't presented as a punishment. Corporate communications never were. But everyone understood what it meant. My phone lit up with congratulatory messages. Daniel's office door remained closed all day. The shift was complete. But the final moment, the one I'd been preparing for, hadn't happened yet. Because eventually, we'd have to work together. And when we did, the power dynamic would be reversed entirely. That moment came 2 weeks later. A deployment request appeared in my approval queue. I now had sign-off authority on all major technical implementations. Requester, Daniel Mercer. Project, Legacy Database Optimization. He needed my approval to proceed. I reviewed the submission carefully. The technical approach was sound, but the documentation was incomplete. Metrics were missing. Risk assessment was superficial. Standard requirements I'd been asking for on all projects. The same requirements Daniel used to dismiss as bureaucratic when he was in charge. I sent it back with detailed comments. Please resubmit with full performance metrics, comprehensive risk analysis, and stakeholder approval documentation. The next morning, Daniel appeared at my office door. Not in the aggressive way he used to enter my space. Quieter now. Almost hesitant. I got your feedback on my deployment request, he said. Yes, I replied calmly. The submission needs additional documentation before I can approve it. These are the same requirements you gave everyone else? Correct. Standard protocol for all major deployments. He stood there for a moment, and I saw him processing it. 2 years ago, he'd told the VP I wasn't ready for leadership exposure. 2 years ago, he'd stolen my work and put his name on it. 2 years ago, he'd blocked my access, corrected my words, and tried to relocate me out of his department. Now he stood in my office, needing my approval. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't make a speech about karma or justice. I just maintained the same professional standards I would with anyone else. I'll need those updates by Friday if you want to make your implementation deadline, I said. He nodded slowly. Understood. He turned to leave, then paused. Monica, he said, not looking at me, for what it's worth, you were always ready. I just wasn't ready to admit it. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was acknowledgement. Thank you for saying that, I replied. He left. I returned to my work. 6 months later, I was leading a team of 8 technical specialists on an enterprise-wide cloud transformation. The project VP had specifically requested me by name. My new office had a window. A real window with natural light and a view of the city. Daniel remained in technical advisory, providing consulting on legacy systems. He was professional in our interactions, thorough in his documentation, no longer trying to control or undermine. We weren't friends. We never would be. But we could work together functionally because the power dynamic had been permanently reset. One afternoon, I was preparing for an executive presentation when someone knocked on my door. It was Daniel, holding a folder. I finished the documentation you requested, he said, handing it to me. I think you'll find everything in order this time. I reviewed it quickly. It was thorough, complete, exactly what was needed. This is excellent, I said. Approved. He nodded, started to leave, then turned back. You've built something good here, he said, gesturing vaguely at my office, my team, my position. The department's running better, more efficient, people are happier. Thank you, I replied. I thought tenure and relationships were enough, he continued. I didn't understand that systems eventually optimize around the people who can actually deliver. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. We all learn at different speeds, I said, offering him a small dignity. He almost smiled. Apparently. After he left, I looked at the project slides on my screen. My name was on every page. Clear. Undisputed. Earned. Not through politics or manipulation. Through competence, patience, and the quiet accumulation of undeniable results. 2 years ago, Daniel Mercer said I wasn't ready for leadership exposure. 2 years later, he wasn't ready for the outcome. And this time, finally, my name was on the slide where it belonged.